Hello to all Cinemaster lovers. Hope you enjoy watching. Let's get started. The movie starts today with Kira and Brian after they bought an old house because the money they had wasn't enough for a new one. They take their kids, Ellie and Steven, and head to the house. Before getting out of the car, Ellie is very scared of how the house looks because it's in a remote and empty place. She tells her mother that she's afraid to get out and that the house looks very creepy. She even researched it and found out that a family disappeared after entering this house. But Kira doesn't pay attention to Ellie's words, and they all get out of the car and go into the house. As soon as they enter, they all feel that something isn't right in the house. They start exploring it piece by piece, and Ellie and her dad go down to the basement, where there's a strange smell. Ellie finds it odd, but her dad tells her it's probably from mold or because the place has been closed for a long time. He then turns his back to leave, but suddenly, without any warning, the door slams shut, leaving Ellie inside. She panics and starts banging on the door while her dad struggles to open it. Kira, meanwhile, tells him he's even useless at opening doors and points straight to the key, and Brian quickly opens the door. When Ellie comes out, she looks at Kira and tells her the house is suspicious, and she feels afraid and unsafe. Ellie is upset and goes to the room she picked to be her own and starts reading her book. But as she's reading, she keeps glancing at the walls of the house, feeling like there's something very strange. Honestly, she's right because this isn't a house anyone should live in. Afterward, Kira comes in and asks Ellie to stay in the house and look after her brother, Steven, and the house, and not leave at all because she and her dad are going out to buy the things they need, like food. Ellie stays, but the whole time she's anxious, wandering around the house. She opens her laptop to watch a movie to try and forget the fear she's feeling. She also gets a call from her friend asking about the new house. Ellie tells her that the house is horrible and not comfortable at all, and honestly, she wishes she could go back to their old house. In the middle of her conversation, Steven sneaks up behind her, wearing a mask and draped in a scarf. He puts his hand on her shoulder, and as soon as she sees the mask, she starts screaming. She asks him where he got it from, and he tells her the closet is full of strange things. Ellie opens the closet and sees very old and valuable-looking items. She's confused about why these things are still here and how the previous owners didn't take them with them. As she's lost in thought, Steven interrupts her, saying that before they came here, their mom told him about the house and he told his friends. One of his friends said the house used to belong to a sorceress in ancient times who made a pact with demons and spirits, and they're still in the house to this day. Ellie doesn't pay much attention to his words, but then she notices an old gramophone in the closet. She decides to take it out and play some music. She does, but suddenly the music stops, and a voice starts speaking in different tones and accents. Ellie is startled and quickly turns it off. To avoid showing Steven she's scared, she asks him to go back to his room. She then goes downstairs and sits in front of the TV to try and forget everything that just happened. But suddenly, there's a flicker in the lights, and then they go out completely. Ellie quickly grabs her phone and calls Kira, telling her that she wants to come back to their old house. Kira tells her she's at work and can't come back right now, but Ellie explains that the power went out and she's really scared. Kira tells her to check the circuit breaker and reminds her that the basement stairs have 10 steps. She also tells her to count them carefully so she doesn't trip. Ellie is terrified and refuses to go down, but Kira reassures her that she'll stay on the phone with her until she flips the breaker. Ellie gets up, lights a candle, and heads to the basement, counting the steps as her mother instructed. But she notices that the number of steps keeps increasing after 10. There are 20, then 25, and finally 30. Ellie starts crying, and at first, Kira thinks she's joking. But when the call suddenly cuts off, Kira becomes very worried and rushes to tell her husband. They both hurry back home and search for Ellie everywhere, but they can't find her. They go down to the basement and flip the circuit breaker, and the basement seems completely normal. There's no sign of Ellie. She isn't in the house or anywhere around it. Kira is panicking, unsure of what to do, but her husband tries to calm her down and calls the police. The officer tells them that girls her age might leave with friends or boys, but Kira refuses to believe that explanation. The next day, they go to the forest and search everywhere, but there's no sign of Ellie or any other person. This makes Kira even more anxious. She prints out pictures of Ellie, distributes them everywhere, and posts them on walls and trees, offering a reward for anyone who can provide information about her whereabouts. After a few days of searching everywhere, Kira takes Steven and heads to the police station, asking if they've found anything. The officer tells her that they've questioned all of Ellie's friends, and they all said the last time they saw her was the day they moved from their old house. He asks Kira if Ellie had ever been involved with any boys, to which Kira replies that Ellie never did anything like that, or even befriended boys. The officer then reveals that they had checked Ellie's laptop messages and found that 3 of her friends were bullying her because no boys wanted to talk to her, or even come near her. Kira doesn't understand the implication until the officer suggests directly that there might be a possibility Ellie committed suicide. But Kira refuses to believe this and decides she will search for her daughter on her own. She returns home and sits with Steven, asking him about the last thing he did with Ellie before going to bed. He tells her about the gramophone and the strange voice they heard. Immediately, Kira brings out the gramophone and goes down to the basement to investigate. She also brings a UV light to check for fingerprints and traces of Ellie. As she scans the floor, she notices strange symbols and numbers written in old dialects. She moves the UV light across the walls and ceiling and sees horrifying drawings. She can't believe what she's seeing. Rushing upstairs, she calls the officer and tells him everything, but he dismisses it, saying the drawings aren't proof of anything. He suggests that maybe the house's previous tenant was an artist, and reminds her that during the time the house was built, it was common for artists to live in such homes. He then asks who they bought the house from. Brian explains that he didn't have enough money to buy a new house, so he had to buy this one at a low price. The owner, a woman named Mrs. Woody, was desperate to sell it at any cost to cover the fees of the nursing home she was staying in. The officer finds it strange that a woman with such a large house would live in a nursing home. Brian tells him that he asked the realtor the same question, but the realtor said she had never lived in the house and had been alone for a long time before deciding to move to the nursing home. Meanwhile, Kira's mind is entirely focused on Ellie. She takes her phone, goes into the bathroom, and keeps calling Ellie repeatedly, hoping for a response. Suddenly, Kira hears Ellie's voice counting the stairs. Just like when they were on the phone earlier, the sound seems to be coming from the sink pipe, which startles her. She rushes down to the basement to find where the sound is coming from. As she stands at the top of the stairs, fear grips her, and she notices a ball on the floor. She kicks it lightly, and the ball rolls down a long flight of steps. Kira is puzzled, knowing the basement should only have 10 steps. Startled, she decides not to go down and stays up all night, thinking about the strange symbols and the things she saw in the basement. As she examines the doors around the house, she sees more of the same strange drawings and numbers she saw in the basement. She contacts the person responsible for selling the house on behalf of Mrs. Woody and her husband. However, the seller tells her he knows nothing about the house except that it's old, and he's never actually met Mrs. Woody. He mentions that she was the daughter of the doctor who originally built the house. Kira takes photos of all the symbols on the doors and goes to her workplace. After some research, she discovers that the symbols are written in an ancient Jewish language, referencing a legendary demon or spirit. This revelation confuses Kira even more, and she returns home unsure of what to do. She looks at the gramophone that Ellie had played the day she disappeared, feeling an urge to play it herself. Meanwhile, Steven is sitting in front of the television. Suddenly, without any warning, he stands up and starts walking toward the wardrobe, counting as he moves. Kira, sensing something is wrong, hurries after him. Steven reaches the number 29 while standing in front of the wardrobe, and Kira quickly calls out to him. At that moment, he snaps out of it, returning to his normal self, and tells her he doesn't remember anything. He has no idea why he was standing in front of the wardrobe or why he was counting. The last thing he remembers is sitting and watching TV. Kira asks him to go to bed, but she remains up, searching for more information about the family that lived in the house before them. She finds out that the previous owner was a mathematician who also mysteriously disappeared along with his wife. Eventually, Kira tracks down the location where he used to work. Suddenly, while Kira is sitting, she hears a sound coming from the basement. She rushes to check and tries with all her might to open the door, but it won't budge. She decides to look through the peephole and is startled to see a terrifying eye staring back at her. She jumps back, frightened, and convinces herself that nothing had actually gone into the basement. She opens the basement door to take a look, but as soon as she steps in, the door slams shut behind her and she hears frightening noises. Her phone slips from her hand, and just then, her husband Rogan arrives and opens the door. Kira tells him everything that happened and expresses her suspicion that the same thing might have happened to Ellie. But Rogan dismisses her concerns, thinking she's rambling due to her grief over their daughter. He goes down to the basement to retrieve the phone and finds some strands of hair at the bottom of the stairs, which he picks up. The next day, Kira visits the university where the mathematician who used to own the house used to work. She meets Dr. Fournette, who was a close friend. She explains everything that's been happening and shows him the pictures of the numbers and symbols. Dr. Fournette informs her that they are not a spell or a puzzle, but rather an extremely complex mathematical equation, one that can open up worlds beyond our own. He explains that everything in life is connected to mathematics, that every letter and every person has a number, and that the underworld is linked to our world through these numbers. He refers to the famous Book of Jabardi. Kira asks him to try to solve the equation and let her know if he finds anything. She then returns home and continues researching the house's history online. Dr. Fournette later contacts Kira, telling her that the equation is missing a critical number, which makes it nearly impossible to solve. He mentions that a similar equation appeared in a house in Canada, where all the inhabitants mysteriously disappeared, just like what happened to the Wood family and their daughter. Meanwhile, Stephen is sitting, as usual, watching TV, when he hears a strange noise coming from the closet. He rushes toward it to see what's inside, and suddenly, he sees his sister Ellie inside the closet, her face pale with strange markings. Shocked, he screams. His parents run to him trying to calm him down, and he tells them what he saw. His father reassures him that it wasn't real, and then goes to check the closet himself. Meanwhile, Kira decides to contact the lawyer who handled the sale of the house for Mrs. Woody. She gets the address of the nursing home where Mrs. Woody is staying and goes there to ask about her. The staff tell her that Mrs. Woody is an odd, mysterious person who spends most of her time praying. Kira manages to speak with Mrs. Woody and asks her about the house, explaining everything that's been happening to them. Mrs. Woody refuses to answer at first, but after Kira insists, Mrs. Woody finally speaks and simply tells her to run away. Confused, Kira presses for more information. Mrs. Woody reveals that her younger brother had a rare illness, and despite all the doctors they consulted, there was no cure. Their father, being a mathematician, managed to create an equation to summon demons, hoping to use one of the demon lords to cure his son. However, suddenly and without warning, everyone in the house disappeared. Kira then asks why Mrs. Woody didn't disappear along with them. Mrs. Woody explains that she had been staying at a friend's house that night. When Kira returned home one day, she found that her family had completely vanished. She searched everywhere until she understood the truth behind the spell her father had performed. She realized he had also bound the house to a lower realm, associated with hell and demons. The phrase, "you must run," echoed in her mind again, and fear gripped Kira. She quickly returned home to tell her husband everything that had happened. He informed her that he had researched the numbers and symbols on the doors and discovered that they were signs for summoning demons, and that the house was built on the foundations of a structure meant for jinn. Meanwhile, Stephen was playing with a toy airplane, but suddenly lost control of the remote, causing the plane to crash into the storage room. He rushed down the stairs to retrieve it, but as he descended, he heard screams around him. Frightened, he screamed, and Kira and Rogan rushed to find him. They went down to the basement but couldn't find him. Kira started to lose control, unsure of what to do. Then they heard Stephen's voice coming from the room, so they hurried upstairs, only to discover him inside the closet as if he were being pulled away. Kira tried to pull him back and wake him up, but realized that strange markings were all over his body, including a star symbol associated with devil worship. He began to emit strange noises, and his body jerked in the air. Kira looked at Rogan, urging him to do something to help Stephen, but Rogan's demeanor had changed. He had lost control of himself. Suddenly, he began counting numbers in reverse, and the closet opened by itself, accompanied by a very strange sound, and the lights went out. Kira quickly headed down to the basement, but found herself descending more and more stairs until she reached a door. When she opened it, she found herself in another world filled with fog, surrounded by many people who seemed to have lost control of themselves. They appeared very strange, and she searched among them for her daughter Ellie until she finally spotted her. Kira reached out to her, and they began to run together, but Kira dropped her flashlight. She climbed many stairs until she found herself back in her house. However, she left her daughter behind and went to check on Steven and Rogan, where they all agreed they needed to get out of the house. As Kira looked down, she noticed her flashlight lying on the ground, the one she had dropped in the basement. Panic surged through her, but she continued on her path to open the door. She realized that it would lead her to the devil, and at that moment, she understood that neither she nor her family would be able to escape from the house. They remained trapped, waiting for their fate with the devil. If you liked the video, subscribe to the channel and activate the notification button to get more new videos. See ya. Videos.